Hello and welcome to LA Legal. I'm Liana, your host, and today I am joined by our two employment attorneys, Nick and Levon. So this week, the NFL has been making headlines for some pretty egregious allegations, not because of the Super Bowl, but because a lawsuit has been filed, a class action lawsuit, actually. So we're here today to discuss some of the allegations. We're here to discuss the repercussions and basically everything we know as of today about this lawsuit. So I'm going to open up the stage for Nick to tell us a little bit about the lawsuit. We have all read the complaint. Let's talk about some of the allegations and take it from there.
So the complaint was filed by the ex-Miami Dolphins head coach Brian Flores. He just completed the second season in a row coaching the Dolphins to a winning record. That's the first time that's happened since 2003 for the Dolphins, and he was terminated immediately after. The lawsuit alleges discrimination based on race, improper hiring practices based on race, and it is a class action. Basically, it involves candidates for head coaching positions, quarterback coach positions, offensive and defensive coordinators, and even a few more that were applied for by black coaches and they were not hired.
So what I want to talk a little bit about before we really dive into discussing the complaint is the fact that Brian Flores was terminated, right? Because I think that it has such a negative connotation. So someone who doesn't really know sort of the world of employment law and really where this is coming from, it might sound like, well, he was fired, so he probably did something wrong. So I want to talk about that a little bit, and you guys can please chime in. The complaint actually discusses the termination, and the reasoning behind the termination. The allegation is that because Brian Flores was deemed a difficult entity to work with, he didn't take direction from higher management, from the team owners, and so on, they let him go. But in actuality, Brian Flores is claiming that he was asked on numerous occasions to tank the games, and he was offered $100K per game so that he can tank them, meaning that they would lose, and then the intent would be that they would get a higher draft pick moving forward. There was also some talk about him not being open to meeting with potential quarterback. So all of this was the pretext for his termination. So he's difficult, they don't want to work with him. But it sounds like there's so much more behind the scenes that's really happening, which was ultimately the reason for the termination. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, you're spot on. Brian Flores' allegations are that, one, the owner, Stephen Ross of the Miami Dolphins, asked him at the beginning of the 2019 season to lose games on purpose and offered him $100,000 for every game that he lost. And by doing so, the team would obviously have a worse season and have a better draft pick. Second, another point you brought up, that Stephen Ross had asked him to meet with a potential free agent quarterback outside of the timeline in which you can meet with free agent quarterbacks, and against which would violate the tampering rules of the NFL. Again, Brian Flores refused, and he believes those are the actual reasons behind his termination. These are huge allegations. One, specifically the one in which Stephen Ross was asking him to lose games on purpose, because a core principle of the NFL is its competitive integrity. By relaying these allegations against Stephen Ross, and if they are found to be true, I think the NFL has no choice but to force Stephen Ross to sell that team. I can't imagine the NFL wanting an owner in position who is incentivizing his team to lose games on purpose, when, as I said, a core principle of the NFL is its competitive integrity.
Well, also having coaches sort of meet potential candidates, if I can call them that, or potential players, outside of that sort of time frame that you mentioned, because I think it's simply unfair to everyone else, right? There are rules and regulations that everyone has to follow for a reason. So if these things are happening behind the scenes, as Brian Flores alleges, which, by the way, he states that once he found out that lunch meeting on a yacht, by the way, was being orchestrated for the sole purpose of him meeting a potential quarterback, he walked off and he didn't want to take any part of it. So he, in his complaint, in my opinion, made a very big stance to make these allegations, but also remove himself entirely from sort of having anybody point the finger at him and say, well, you participated even minimally in this as well. Would you guys agree?
Yeah, I'd agree. And then to add to that that supposed quarterback meeting, there was a whole bunch involved there in the complaint. So supposedly the quarterback was supposed to arrive, and it was supposed to be a total coincidence that he was there, sort of like circumventing the time period rule where you're not allowed to meet with quarterbacks. They were going to schmooze him supposedly on a yacht, and then, that would all be an attempt to convince Brian Flores that he should draft this quarterback. All indications say that it's their current quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa. And that was supposed to be his way to win Brian Flores over to tanking games after he'd already said no. It's just, there's a lot of messy and serious allegations in the complaint, and we haven't even gotten to the biggest ones. Yeah.
Right. So let's talk about the Rooney Rule a little bit, because this comes up multiple times in interviews, in like ESPN newscasting right now, because everyone is talking about this. So talk to us a little bit. Why don't you explain what that is? And then I think that's going to be a good starting point for us to discuss everything else in the allegations.
The background of Brian Flores' lawsuit, and I think what's most important, more so than his termination from the Dolphins, is the discriminatory practice the NFL has in hiring or even interviewing candidates for head coaching positions, general manager positions, and front office executive positions. This has been a conversation in the NFL for a long time, and in 2003 they implemented something called the Rooney Rule, which said that if there's a head coaching vacancy, and it was later expanded to include assistant coaches and general managers, you need to interview one minority candidate before determining who's going to fill that vacancy. Brian Flores' allegations, specifically the text messages from Bill Belichick, indicate that he was offered an interview with the New York Giants, but he learned through text messages from Bill Belichick that they had already made a decision on who they were going to hire before they even interviewed him. His allegations are that clearly they were doing this in order to say that they complied with the Rooney Rule and interviewed a minority candidate when they had already made a decision and that interview was a sham.
Right. So tell me if I'm wrong, but when I kind of started diving into the situation, and I know very little about the NFL, so the Rooney Rule and all of these things were kind of new to me. But my initial thought was, I don't like this rule, because it's almost like maybe the driving sort of force behind it is positive in nature, where like, okay, well, we're going to try to open the interview and hiring processes to everyone, whether it's minorities, people of color, or whoever else. But it almost seems like, to me, this was implemented and almost to just have people kind of like a check mark, like, okay, we've interviewed one minority, or we've made the attempt to interview, as in this case, right? They didn't even get to interview him when the decision was made. So it's almost kind of offensive to me. I didn't like it at all. And I think when you look at the numbers in the NFL now, it almost seems like that rule, it's like I said, it's just there to say we've made an effort, versus it's there and people are actually following it. What are your thoughts? Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. Maybe the intent of the Rooney Rule when it was written was good, but it clearly hasn't worked. At the time it came into place, there were 4 head coaches of color in the NFL. 20 years later, right now, there are only 1. And I think the mistake is really that there's no mechanism to like enforce the integrity behind these interviews that was written into the Rooney Rule. The interviews can be a complete sham, and just like Flores' allegations are, they seem like they probably have been. So you have the New York Giants hiring a different head coach named Brian before, allegedly, and according to Bill Belichick's text, before the Giants even took their interview with Brian Flores. And now you have the Denver Broncos, where Flores alleges he had an interview with them, and John Elway and the other guys in charge were not only an hour late to the interview, but came clearly hungover. The substance of the interview was super weak, allegedly. And so in Brian Flores' allegations, the Broncos really didn't even ever have any intent to take this interview seriously, as if the decision has already been made before they even interviewed him.
Right. So I want to play devil's advocate a little bit, okay, just to make this a little interesting and spice it up. So we work in a very large law firm. Obviously, we do a ton of interviews. And for every position, you don't just set up an interview for 1 or 2 people, right? Sometimes we have 15, 20 people who are lined up for interviews. So, it's happened, or it's possible, where you interview several people, and your fourth candidate that's it. This is my guy, right? This is everything checks out. This is who I want to hire for this particular position. So in your opinion, is it entirely possible or at all possible that perhaps this wasn't a sham interview, and in fact, they did have every intention to interview Brian Flores, but Brian DeBoll, who happened to be, let's say, the second candidate that they interviewed, they're like, yep, this is our guy. Let's move forward and interview everyone else. But so far, this is who we like for this position. And things just kind of got blown out of proportion where that really wasn't the intent. So what are your thoughts?
That can always happen, but it's always best to still interview the other people. Just because you were blown away by one candidate doesn't mean you're going to be even more blown away by the next one. Mm-hmm. And the timing of Bill Belichick's text, it indicates that the Giants had already chosen DeBoll. I think it says, it's your interview to lose, or go there and kill it because you're already their man, something like that. It's not like his interview went well. He was already chosen before it even took place.
Got it. Okay, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. It's possible, but as Nick said, I think Brian Flores' position is that they're not being given the same opportunities to interview as white head coaches are. You might think that the other Brian was the best candidate possible, but Brian Flores should still be given the opportunity to interview and surpass that. Additionally, parts of his complaints go to even when given opportunities, black head coaches aren't given the same leeway as white head coaches. He gave several examples where black head coaches had succeeded in their positions, yet were terminated when white head coaches were not succeeding in those head coaching positions and given a longer time. When you get an NFL team, it's generally a long road. Everything's not handed to you. You need to build a team, implement a structure and everything, and coaches like Brian Flores, who has succeeded for the past 2 years. There's no ifs, ands, and what's the saying?
If, ends, and buts.
If, ands, and buts about it. He succeeded over the past 2 years, yet was still terminated when there are white head coaches who have done the opposite and yet get to keep their jobs and are given the opportunity to right the ship. And I think that's another point of his lawsuit that he wants to get across.
I actually agree with you. I was going to say that's kind of really what happened to him, right? He has 2 back-to-back successful seasons, and then he's terminated again for being difficult to work with and whatnot. But what was the statistic? How long were the Dolphins not successful?
Yeah, the Dolphins haven't had 2 successive seasons of winning records since 2003. Right, so they've been one of the worst franchises in the league for about 15, 20 years.
So then
this guy takes them from a top 5, maybe top 3 draft pick, which means they were terrible, to 2 consecutive winning seasons. Like that's a very
huge.
Good job.
Right,
yeah.
And so even if he were difficult, assuming that none of this sort of behind the scenes stuff happened, and even if he was difficult to work with, I would imagine that he did so well that you still continue to give this guy an opportunity to prove himself, because maybe you do make it to the playoffs next time. Is that fair?
Yeah, they were close to the playoffs this year, and the trend was going up. So in most circumstances, a franchise you'd think would want to keep that coach.
Because he's doing something right.
He's obviously doing something right, yeah.
Right.
I'm on the same page. I don't think it could be said enough how big of a risk Brian Flores is taking in doing this. There's examples of Colin Kaepernick as one in which he fought the NFL, and for the next several years, the NFL did everything in their power to fight him and defame him, and he never played quarterback in the NFL again. I think Brian Flores is well aware of the risks of what he's doing. There's a high possibility that he might never coach again, even though he's actually currently still being considered for 2 positions for the Houston Texans and the New Orleans Saints.
Well, now he's kind of in an interesting position, right? Because if he doesn't get those jobs, then because they came those jobs are being offered to him after the lawsuit was filed. So if he doesn't get them, it's entirely possible that those teams are like, okay, we want nothing to do with this. But then if he does get the position, again, it puts him in a very bad position going forward with this lawsuit. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a super interesting chronology. Flores absolutely knew that his civil complaint was finished and ready to file, And knowing that, it appears that he took the interview with the New Orleans Saints yesterday, and then at some point immediately after, probably like called his attorneys or texted his attorneys saying, file the complaint right now, let it hit the press, and then once it hits the press, now the Saints and the rest of the NFL sort of being dared. Like we're daring them, hire me or don't hire me. If you don't hire me, now I have another defendant in my lawsuit. Now I have more evidence for my claims.
It's actually a good way to almost ensure that you get the job, really, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Because now I feel like, like I said, it puts the other teams in a very vulnerable position because damned if you do, damned if you don't at this point.
Yeah, exactly. You know? That's what I find so interesting about it. Now, like, it's only been a day, so not too much has come out, but that's what it appears.
Yeah, it's a great strategy. I don't know if that came from his attorney. I don't know if it was his idea, but it's brilliant.
Yeah, and I mean, if he's not hired by the Saints, basically by forcing their hand, look, basically any NCAA college football team and program, except for maybe Alabama, will be dying to hire this guy. So it's not like he will never have an opportunity to make money again. It just probably won't be in the NFL.
He took both of those interviews with the Texans and Saints, and then shortly thereafter filed his lawsuit. And he actually informed both those teams of that he was going to be filing a lawsuit against the NFL. So it is a very interesting position. But the NFL has already come out and said this is a meritless lawsuit. Somehow they did their full investigation within 2 hours.
Well, that's just a PR move. Yeah. You know, I mean, it's they're going to say something, right? Because radio silence is not really like it's the NFL. They can't not say anything. So they have to. It was a very like.
They could say we're investigating the merits of his claims.
Yeah, that's what they should say. If I know the NFL, which I think I know pretty well, the next several months and years, depending on how long this lawsuit lasts, is going to just be the NFL's PR machine trying to bring down Brian Flores in any way they can. I suspect he knew that prior to filing this lawsuit. So that's what I expect next. And that's been their MO since they've been in operation.
Any skeletons in his closet, the NFL's about to find them, and they're about to publicize them. Now, on their end, they're already releasing that, Washington has a new team name. Look over here. Don't focus on the lawsuit that we're, systematically racist. They're going to send us distractions. Normally, they would never announce a team has a new name a week before the Super Bowl under other circumstances. So I think they just released that this morning to distract.
I agree. It's just going to be a PR move. So what I actually want to talk about next is the complaint itself. And I think this will be interesting to our viewers and listeners because every sort of news article that you open up, there's at least the first page of the complaint on there. And what I found to be so interesting and so powerful is that the first line, and I haven't seen a complaint like that before.
Me neither. I was like, what is this?
Literally, the first line is a direct quote of the text message from Bill Belichick. Okay, so that I have never seen that. Usually the complaint just kind of starts, you start talking about the law and jurisdiction and all these like boring things. But these guys are really going for the jugular. Like if you read it, you have a text message, and then there's an MLK quote, and then they just like some of the language and the verbiage in there. I think it's just incredible. They've included copies of text messages. There's just so much in that complaint that usually does not go in a complaint.
Photos of all the
head coaches, like. I mean, it was phenomenal for me to see all of that because it was so new to me, but also you can tell that these guys are really going hard against the NFL. What are your thoughts?
I mean, tactically, we typically don't include every fact and piece of evidence we have on hand in a complaint for a million different reasons, but you don't typically want to show your hand. Now, maybe they have a lot more in their hand that they're not showing, but it's definitely not your typical civil complaint, for sure.
Yeah. There's a couple points I want to make on this. I think obviously that was a strategic move on their part. It's both a complaint and a press release all in once. As Nick said, complaints that we've all filed many complaints, and they're generally much more vague and straight to the point. I think one possible reason behind that is because I think there's a possibility this case ends up in arbitration, because I have no doubt in my mind the NFL has an arbitration clause in every single head coaching contract. And for those who don't know, once a case is in arbitration, it's less public. It's a more private forum. You don't have the opportunity to have a jury of your peers decide your case. Rather, it's a retired judge or a lawyer with experience. So I think there's a possibility this case ends up in arbitration, and we might not see. I'm sure Brian Flores and his attorneys are suspecting this and will fight it, but arbitration makes it private, and us in the public will not be privy to the discovery that happens, the deposition transcripts. So I think the detailedness of that complaint was strategically planned in case this ends up in arbitration, so people know really what's at stake here and everything they have on their hand.
Yeah, and something else actually just occurred to me, since Brian Flores is not currently employed by the NFL, he might not be under any contract that has an arbitration clause in it. So, if the claims are really based in discriminatory hiring practices, he may not, currently be under any active arbitration clause. That just occurred to me while you were saying that. I don't know. What do you guys think?
That's 100% going to be the first fight here. I think the first thing we see from the NFL's lawyers is what we'd call a motion to compel arbitration, and Brian Flores and his lawyers opposing that, because the arbitration agreements, me and Nick deal with them all the time, are 100% for the benefit of the employer, the NFL, and they're generally ironclad, very hard to get out of. I believe Brian Flores and his attorneys will fight tooth and nail to keep this case in the federal court where it was filed, so the public is privy to all the information.
I agree. So one more point that I want to make on this, and there's just so much to talk about, but what I want to talk about is just employment law in general. These things happen on a daily basis. It can happen in a law firm. It can happen in the corporate world. It can happen anywhere. Discriminatory hiring practices, discrimination in the workplace, it happens all the time, right? And not all of our viewers and listeners are NFL, NBA players, right? These are just normal people. So let's talk a little bit about evidence, right? Because allegations, anyone can make any kind of an allegation, but you need the evidence to support those allegations in order to win a trial. So in this situation, it seems like we're looking kind of like at the totality of all the evidence, right? Like prior hiring practices and so on and so forth, and current employment of the head coaches and their race and so on. But talk to us a little bit about, to our viewers and listeners, about what they can do if they feel like they have been victims of discrimination, right? What is it that they can present to an attorney like yourselves to take on their case and help them out in a situation like this?
Well, like the winning lottery ticket of evidence would be like a written text or email or something in writing, literally saying, I fired you because of your race or your sex or your gender or your sexual orientation, anything we call a protected class. Now, do those winning lottery tickets happen often? No, they don't. Most bosses are smarter than to send messages like that. But there are still tons and tons of ways to gather evidence besides just a simple text or email. Process in our world is called the discovery process. We interview people in depositions. We ask them written questions that they have to answer, and it's a long process of gathering evidence to create a case.
Direct evidence like that, you don't come by. If you do, you hit a jackpot. Call us immediately. A lot of what we work with is circumstantial evidence, the timing between things that happen. For example, if someone goes on a pregnancy leave and they come back and 2 weeks later they're fired, well, we can infer that they were probably fired because of that pregnancy leave. And if you look at it further, if this was an employee who had positive performance reviews throughout their entire employment and they come back and they're fired, we can infer that they were likely fired because of their pregnancy leave. So that circumstantial evidence is the type of things we look for. And
we'll look into the employer's practices, right? I mean, just to kind of bring up the complaint again, there's photos of all of the head coaches, right? And there's one African American in them, right? So it's something that you can look into and kind of dive deep into the company's practices. So it's definitely something worth exploring if you think you have been victim to something like this, because like Nick and Levon both said, you don't need that ticket to say, well, this is what my boss texted me. It could just be, this is what I think, and then us or really any other attorney can look into it.
All the discriminatory practice has to be is a motivating factor in their decision to terminate you or punish you in any other way, really. Just a motivating factor. Doesn't even have to be the whole reason.
So thank you guys so much for joining me. I know there was a lot to talk about. For those of you who are listening, please follow and subscribe. You can find us on iHeartRadio, Apple Music, and Spotify. And for those of you who actually want to watch us, please follow us on YouTube. Thank you, and until next time.